Welcome to today's story, a gripping tale of love, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of one man's choices. Meet Elliot Harris, a man who seems to have it all: a loving wife, a young son, and a picture-perfect suburban life. But beneath the surface lies a storm of infidelity and deception that threatens to tear it all apart. As secrets unravel and tensions rise, Elliot must face the fallout of his actions, risking everything he holds dear. Stick around to see how this intense drama unfolds. You won't want to miss a second of it. It's funny how the most ordinary mornings can lead to the most unexpected twists in life. The year was 2015, the place a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago. Picture tree-lined streets, neatly trimmed lawns, and a cozy little coffee shop on every corner. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, or at least they thought they did. Our story begins with Elliot Harris. 34 years old, married for 8 years, and the proud father of a 4-year-old boy, Jacob Elliot was the kind of guy you'd expect to have it all figured out. He had a steady job as a sales executive at a local tech firm, a mortgage on a modest house, and a wife, Lauren, who seemed to embody everything perfect about suburban living. But as we all know, appearances can be deceiving. Elliot wasn't unhappy exactly, but let's just say his life had started to feel predictable. Day in, day out, it was the same routine. Up at 6:30 a.m., coffee brewed by 6:45, Jacob fed and off to daycare by 7:30. From there, it was a steady stream of sales calls, client emails, and awkward small talk in the break room. By the time he got home, there was barely enough energy left for dinner and a rerun of Friends before collapsing into bed. Weekends weren't much better. Mowing the lawn, grocery shopping, maybe a family outing to the park if they were feeling adventurous. Lauren, on the other hand, thrived in this rhythm. She loved her role as a stay-at-home mom. Her days were filled with PTA meetings, playdates, and Pinterest-inspired craft projects. She was organized to the point of perfection, and while Elliot appreciated her efforts to keep their lives in order, he couldn't help but feel like something was missing. Enter Tessa Monroe. Tessa was the new marketing consultant at Elliot's firm. In her late 20s, she had that kind of energy that could light up a room, or an office for that matter. She was sharp, witty, and effortlessly charming. With her auburn hair and a confidence that bordered on magnetic, she stood out in a way that Elliot couldn't quite ignore. Not that he was looking, at least not at first, but Tessa had this way of making everyone around her feel interesting, including Elliot. It all started innocently enough. A shared elevator ride, a quick exchange about the lousy coffee in the break room, and a few laughs over a poorly formatted sales report. Elliot told himself it was nothing, just friendly banter with a coworker. But over the next few weeks, those casual chats turned into longer conversations. Tessa had a knack for asking the kind of questions that made Elliot feel seen. "So, what made you want to work in sales?" she'd ask, her head tilted in genuine curiosity. "Well, I guess I kind of fell into it," Elliot would reply, shrugging. "Pays the bills, you know." But Tessa wasn't one to settle for surface-level answers. She'd press further, her green eyes narrowing with playful determination. "Yeah, but what do you really want to do? Like, if money weren't an issue?" And that was the thing. Elliot didn't know no one had asked him that in years. At home, things with Lauren remained steady but distant. She noticed the shift in Elliot's demeanor, though she chalked it up to stress at work. "You've been quiet lately," she mentioned one evening as they sat in the living room. "Just a lot on my plate," he replied, avoiding her gaze. He wasn't lying, but he wasn't exactly being honest either. Lauren smiled, brushing off the moment. "Maybe we should plan a weekend getaway. Just the two of us. Jacob can stay with my parents." Elliot nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, maybe." But the truth was, the idea of alone time with Lauren didn't excite him the way it used to. Back at the office, things with Tessa continued to escalate, not in any obvious way, but in the kind of small, subtle gestures that carried more weight than they should. A lingering glance, a compliment about his tie, the way her laughter seemed just a bit louder when he was around. Then came the night of the company's quarterly networking event. Held at a trendy downtown bar, it was the kind of thing Elliot usually dreaded, but this time he found himself looking forward to it, though he wouldn't admit why. The bar was buzzing with chatter and the clinking of glasses. Elliot arrived late, scanning the room for a familiar face. He spotted Tessa near the corner, talking animatedly with a group of coworkers. When their eyes met, she waved him over. "Elliot, glad you could make it," she said, handing him a drink. The conversation flowed effortlessly, as it always did with Tessa. They talked about everything from work to travel to their favorite movies. Somewhere along the way, they drifted to a quieter part of the bar. It wasn't planned, but it felt natural, inevitable even. "You're different from most people here," Tessa said, her voice softer now. "How so?" Elliot asked, genuinely curious. "You're real, like, you're not trying to impress anyone. I like that." Elliot felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by the warmth of her words. "Thanks. That means a lot," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. As the night wore on, the group began to thin out. Elliot and Tessa stayed until the very end, talking until the bar staff began stacking chairs and wiping down tables. Outside, the crisp night air felt like a wake-up call. "I should get going," Elliot said, though he hesitated. "Yeah, me too," Tessa replied, her breath visible in the cold. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence was heavy, charged with unspoken words. Finally, Tessa broke it. "Good night, Elliot." "Good night," he echoed, watching as she walked away. Back at home, Elliot lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He told himself nothing had happened, because technically nothing had. But deep down, he knew that wasn't entirely true. Something had shifted, and there was no undoing it. The next morning, he found himself checking his phone more often than usual, hoping for a message from Tessa. But none came. At work, things between them seemed normal, friendly, but professional. Elliot tried to convince himself that he'd imagined the connection, that it was all in his head. But as the days turned into weeks, the tension between them only grew, and so did Elliot's guilt. What started as a spark had become a fire, and Elliot was standing dangerously close to the flames. From that moment on, Elliot's world started to unravel, not in some dramatic overnight explosion, but in small, almost imperceptible shifts, the kind of changes you notice only in hindsight. And while Elliot went about his daily life, morning coffee, daycare drop-offs, endless sales calls, there was a growing divide between the life he was living and the one he couldn't stop imagining. Tessa wasn't the cause of that divide. Not exactly, but she sure had a way of making it impossible to ignore. Things came to a head. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Elliot was sitting in his cubicle, staring blankly at his computer screen as the sound of rain drummed against the office windows. His inbox was overflowing, but he couldn't bring himself to care. He was too busy replaying his last conversation with Tessa, dissecting every word, every glance, every lingering pause. Then, as if summoned by his thoughts, she appeared. "Hey, you busy?" Tessa asked, leaning casually against the partition. "Not really," Elliot lied, minimizing his email window. Tessa smiled. "Good. I was about to grab a coffee. Want to join me?" Elliot hesitated. He knew he should say no. He knew he should stay at his desk, answer his emails, and focus on anything other than the woman standing in front of him. But before he could stop himself, he was nodding. "Yeah, sure, why not?" The coffee shop was quiet, save for the occasional hiss of the espresso machine and the soft hum of indie music playing in the background. Tessa and Elliot sat in a corner booth, their cups steaming between them. "So," Tessa began, stirring her latte, "you seemed a little distracted lately? Everything okay?" Elliot forced a chuckle. "Yeah, just work stuff, you know?" Tessa raised an eyebrow. "Come on, Elliot. I know work stuff when I see it, and this isn't that. What's really going on?" For a moment, Elliot considered brushing her off, but there was something about the way she looked at him, earnest, unguarded, that made him want to open up. "It's just life, I guess," he admitted. "Sometimes it feels like I'm stuck in this loop, you know? Same thing every day, no surprises, no excitement." Tessa nodded, her expression softening. "I get it. I've been there. It's easy to get comfortable, but comfort isn't the same as happiness." Her words hit Elliot harder than he expected. Comfort isn't the same as happiness. He turned the phrase over in his mind, wondering if it was true. And if it was, what did that mean for him? Over the next few weeks, Elliot and Tessa's conversations became more frequent and more personal. They talked about everything, their dreams, their regrets, the things they wished they could change about their lives. It was innocent, or at least that's what Elliot told himself. But deep down, he knew there was a line they were dangerously close to crossing. At home, the distance between Elliot and Lauren was becoming impossible to ignore. She tried to bridge the gap, planning date nights and family outings, but Elliot always seemed to find an excuse. "I'm just tired," he'd say, or "Work's been crazy lately." And while Lauren didn't press him, the hurt in her eyes was impossible to miss. Then came the night of the company gala, a semi-formal affair held at a downtown hotel. Lauren was supposed to come, but Jacob had come down with a fever, so she stayed home. "You sure you'll be okay without me?" she asked, adjusting the tie around Elliot's neck. "Yeah, I'll be fine," he assured her, planting a kiss on her cheek. But as he drove to the event, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just leaving his house, he was leaving something much more important behind. The gala was everything Elliot had expected: overpriced drinks, forced smiles, and shallow conversations with people he barely knew. He was about to call it a night when he spotted Tessa across the room. She was wearing a sleek black dress that hugged her figure in all the right places. Her hair was swept to one side, and her lips were painted a bold shade of red. She looked breathtaking. "Elliot," she said, her face lighting up when she saw him. "You clean up nicely." "You don't look too bad yourself," he replied, his voice tinged with nervous energy. They spent the rest of the evening together, their laughter and whispered conversations standing in stark contrast to the formal atmosphere around them. At one point, Tessa reached out to brush a stray piece of lint from Elliot's shoulder. The gesture was brief, almost imperceptible, but it sent a jolt of electricity through him. By the time the gala ended, Elliot knew he was in trouble. They stood outside the hotel, the city lights reflecting off the rain-slicked pavement. "Need a ride?" Elliot offered, though he immediately regretted it. Tessa hesitated, her eyes searching his face. "That's probably not a good idea," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elliot nodded, his heart sinking. "Yeah, you're probably right." For a moment they just stood there, the tension between them almost unbearable. Then, without thinking, Elliot stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "Tessa, She cut him off with a kiss. It was quick, almost desperate, but it was enough to shatter whatever was left of Elliot's self-control. When he got home that night, Elliot was a mess of emotions: guilt, confusion, and a dangerous undercurrent of exhilaration. Lauren was asleep on the couch, a blanket draped over her shoulders. He stood there for a moment, watching her, his heart heavy with the weight of what he'd just done. "Hey," she mumbled, stirring awake. "How was the gala?" "It was fine," Elliot lied, his voice hollow. "You should go to bed, I'll clean up." Lauren nodded, too tired to argue. As she shuffled off to the bedroom, Elliot sank into the couch, his mind racing. And just like that, everything changed. What had started as a harmless connection had spiraled into something Elliot could no longer control. He tried to focus on work, on family, on anything that would distract him from the growing storm inside him. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop thinking about Tessa and the kiss they'd shared. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any thoughts or predictions about where this is heading, drop them in the comments below. Your support means everything. From that moment, it was as though Elliot's life was split in two. By day, he was the devoted husband and hard-working employee everyone expected him to be. But by night, or whenever he was alone, his thoughts were consumed by Tessa. The memory of her kiss lingered like a spark, ready to ignite everything he'd built. The guilt was unbearable, yet the pull was irresistible, and the worst part, Tessa seemed to feel the same. Their interactions at work became a delicate dance: furtive glances, stolen smiles, casual touches that lingered a second too long. It was like they were playing with fire, knowing full well they'd get burned, but the thrill of it was intoxicating, and neither one of them seemed willing or able to stop. Then, one Friday afternoon, everything came to a head. Tessa sent Elliot a text. "Happy hour tonight. Just the two of us?" Elliot stared at the message, his heart pounding. He knew what she was asking. He knew what it would mean if he said yes. But despite every alarm bell going off in his head, he found himself typing a reply. "I'll be there." The bar was dimly lit. The kind of place that offered just enough privacy for conversations you didn't want anyone else to overhear. Elliot arrived first, claiming a booth in the back. He was nervous, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his beer glass as he waited. When Tessa walked in, it was like the air shifted. She slid into the booth across from him, her smile both warm and a little dangerous. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, her tone teasing. "Neither was I," Elliot admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. They talked for hours, their conversation flowing as easily as the drinks. But beneath the surface there was a tension, a quiet understanding that this was more than just two coworkers grabbing a drink. Finally, Tessa broke the silence. "So, what are we doing, Elliot?" Her question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Elliot didn't have an answer, not one he was ready to say out loud anyway. "I don't know," he said at last, "but I know I can't stop thinking about you." Tessa leaned closer, her eyes searching his. "Then maybe it's time to stop overthinking." That night, Elliot made a choice, one he couldn't take back. As they left the bar, Tessa reached for his hand, and he didn't pull away. They walked together to her car, the world around them fading into the background. When they kissed, it wasn't like the first time. It was deeper, more deliberate, and this time, neither of them stopped. Elliot didn't go home that night. The next morning, reality came crashing down. Elliot woke up in Tessa's bed, his heart racing as he took in his surroundings. The sunlight streaming through the curtains felt almost accusatory, like it was shining a spotlight on his guilt. He dressed quickly, his mind a blur of excuses and half-formed plans. Tessa stirred, her voice soft and groggy. "You don't have to rush off, you know." I need to get home," Elliot stammered, avoiding her gaze. Tessa didn't press him, but her expression said enough. This wasn't just a fling to her. It was something more, and that terrified Elliot almost as much as the thought of facing Lauren. When Elliot walked through the door of his house, Lauren was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand. She looked up, her brow furrowing. "You're home late. Everything okay?" "Yeah," Elliot lied, forcing a smile. "Work stuff ran late and I crashed at a friend's place." Lauren nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "You could have called." "I know, sorry," he said, kissing her on the forehead, but the guilt gnawed at him, a constant reminder of what he'd done. Over the next few weeks, the affair continued. Elliot and Tessa met whenever they could. Lunch breaks, after work, even the occasional weekend when Lauren took Jacob to visit her parents. It was reckless and unsustainable, and Elliot knew it, but he couldn't bring himself to end it. With Tessa, he felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. She made him feel seen, understood, wanted. But with every stolen moment, the weight of his deception grew heavier. Then came the breaking point. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Elliot was at home with Lauren and Jacob. They were in the living room, Jacob playing with his toy cars while Lauren scrolled through her phone. "Hey, Elliot," she said suddenly, her tone casual. "Who's Tessa?" Elliot froze, his heart stopping mid-beat. "What?" "Tessa," Lauren repeated, holding up her phone. "She commented on one of your Facebook posts. I don't remember you mentioning her." Elliot scrambled for an explanation. "Oh, she's just a coworker. We've been working on a project together." Lauren nodded, her expression unreadable. "She seems nice." Elliot forced a smile, but inside, he was panicking. If Lauren was starting to notice things, it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. The tension between Elliot and Lauren grew in the days that followed. She became more distant, her questions more pointed, and Elliot found himself caught between two worlds. One where he was a loving husband and father, and another where he was someone he barely recognized. Then, one evening, Lauren confronted him. "Elliot, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady but strained. "About what?" he asked, though he already knew. "About us, about why you've been so different lately." Elliot felt his chest tighten. He could see the hurt in her eyes, the cracks in the foundation of their marriage. "I'm just stressed," he said weakly. Lauren shook her head. "It's more than that, I can feel it, and I need to know the truth." Elliot knew he couldn't keep lying. Not to Lauren, not to himself. The affair had spiraled out of control, and now it was threatening to destroy everything. But as he looked at Lauren, at the woman he'd promised to love and cherish, he realized he was at a crossroads. Would he come clean and try to salvage their marriage, or would he double down on the lies, risking everything for a connection he couldn't fully explain? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories like this one, and let us know in the comments, what would you do in Elliot's shoes? Elliot's heart raced as he stood in the kitchen, staring at Lauren. The weight of her words hung in the air, a ticking time bomb he couldn't defuse. He could feel the walls closing in, the dual lives he'd been leading teetering on the edge of collapse. Lauren's eyes bore into his, filled with a mix of suspicion and pain. "I need to know the truth," she said again, her voice quieter now but no less firm. For a moment, Elliot thought about telling her everything. The guilt was suffocating, and part of him longed for the release of confession. But as he opened his mouth to speak, his phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with a message from Tessa. "Thinking about you." Lauren's gaze flickered to the phone, her expression hardening. "Is that her?" she asked, her tone sharper now. Elliot snatched the phone, shoving it into his pocket. "It's just work stuff," he lied, his voice betraying his panic. "Work stuff?" Lauren repeated, crossing her arms. "Elliot, I'm not stupid. Who is she?" The confrontation was inevitable, and Elliot knew it, but he wasn't ready, not yet. Instead of answering, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Lauren standing there, stunned. In the living room, Jacob was watching cartoons, oblivious to the tension thickening the air. Elliot crouched beside his son, ruffling his hair. "Hey, buddy. How about we go to the park tomorrow?" he asked, forcing a smile. Jacob grinned. "Yeah, can we play soccer?" "Of course," Elliot replied, his chest tightening. He couldn't let his son see the cracks forming in their family. Later that night, as Lauren slept fitfully beside him, Elliot stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He thought about Tessa, about the way she made him feel alive, seen, understood. But he also thought about Lauren, about the life they'd built together, and the pain he saw in her eyes earlier. He was at a breaking point. Something had to give. The next morning, Elliot decided to call Tessa. He couldn't keep doing this, not to himself, not to Lauren, and not to her. He needed to end it. "Hey," Tessa said when she picked up, her voice warm and familiar. "Hey," Elliot replied, his heart heavy. "We need to talk." Tessa hesitated. "That sounds ominous." "It's just, I can't keep doing this," Elliot said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "I can't keep lying to Lauren. It's not fair to her, and it's not fair to you." Tessa was silent for a moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but laced with sadness. "I understand," she said. "But Elliot, you need to figure out what you want. You can't keep living in limbo." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." That evening, Elliot came home determined to come clean to Lauren. He rehearsed what he would say during the drive, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. When he walked through the door, Lauren was sitting on the couch, her arms wrapped around her knees. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Lauren," he began, his voice shaking. "We need to talk." She didn't respond, just nodded for him to continue. Elliot took a deep breath, his chest tightening. "I haven't been honest with you about a lot of things." Lauren's face hardened, but she didn't interrupt. "There's someone at work, Tessa," he admitted. "It started out as nothing, just talking, but it turned into something more." Lauren's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. "How far did it go?" she asked, her voice trembling. Elliot hesitated. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I was wrong, and I want to fix this. I want to fix us. Lauren stood, her hands trembling at her sides. Do you even know what you're saying? Do you have any idea what you've done to me, to Jacob? Elliot reached for her, but she stepped back. Don't, she said, her voice breaking. I need time to think. The next few days were a blur of silence and tension. Lauren barely spoke to Elliot, and when she did, it was curt and to the point. At night, she slept in the guest room, leaving Elliot alone in their bed. At work, Tessa kept her distance. Their once easy rapport was replaced by awkward silences and stolen glances. It was as though a wall had been erected between them, and neither one knew how to tear it down. Elliot felt like he was drowning. He had broken everything that mattered, and he didn't know how to put it back together. Then one evening, Lauren sat down across from him at the kitchen table. I've made a decision, she said, her voice steady. Elliot braced himself. Okay. I'm not ready to give up on us, she said. But if we're going to make this work, we need help counseling honest conversations, and you need to cut all ties with her. Elliot nodded, relief washing over him. I'll do whatever it takes. Lauren's eyes softened, but there was still a guardedness in her expression. This isn't going to be easy, Elliot. You broke something in us, and it's going to take a lot to fix it. I know, he said, but I'm ready to try. As the weeks went on, Elliot and Lauren began attending couples therapy. The sessions were painful and raw, forcing them to confront the cracks in their marriage that had been there long before Tessa entered the picture. Elliot cut all contact with Tessa, deleting her number and unfollowing her on social media. It was like closing a chapter of his life, one filled with regret and lessons he hoped never to repeat. But the road to healing was far from smooth. There were days when Lauren couldn't look at him without anger or sadness. Days when Elliot doubted whether they could ever truly move past what had happened. And yet, there were moments of hope. Quiet nights spent talking instead of watching TV, shared laughter over Jacob's antics, small glimpses of the love that had brought them together in the first place. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a start. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and let us know in the comments. Do you think Elliot and Lauren can rebuild their marriage, or is some damage just too deep? The decision to try and save their marriage was just the beginning. For Elliot and Lauren, the journey ahead was an uphill battle filled with moments of doubt, anger, and vulnerability. It wasn't just about rebuilding trust. It was about confronting the cracks that had been there all along. Elliot threw himself into therapy, determined to show Lauren he was serious about changing. But no matter how many sessions they attended, the shadow of his affair with Tessa loomed large, casting doubt over their every interaction. One evening, after Jacob had gone to bed, Lauren confronted Elliot in the kitchen. She had been quiet during dinner, barely looking up from her plate. Now, her hands trembled as she clutched a mug of tea. I need to know something, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Elliot set down the dish he was washing and turned to face her. Anything, he said, though his stomach churned at what might come next. Did you love her? The question hit him like a freight train. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Elliot, Lauren pressed, her eyes brimming with tears. I need to know. No, he said finally, his voice firm. It wasn't love. It was a distraction, a mistake, but it never meant anything compared to you. Lauren nodded slowly, but the pain in her eyes remained. I want to believe you, she said. But it's hard. I look at you, and I can't stop wondering if I'll ever be enough for you again. You are enough, Elliot said, his voice breaking. You've always been enough. I'm the one who failed you. In the weeks that followed, Elliot and Lauren began to rebuild their lives piece by piece. They worked on communicating more openly, sharing their fears and frustrations in ways they hadn't before, but the road was far from smooth. Every step forward seemed to bring with it a new reminder of the betrayal they were trying to move past. One night, as they sat together on the couch, Lauren said something that stopped Elliot in his tracks. You know, if it weren't for Jacob, I don't think I could have stayed. Elliot's chest tightened. I know, he said softly, and I don't blame you. I just need you to understand how close we came to losing everything, Lauren continued. If we're going to make this work, you have to be all in. No more secrets, no more lies. I promise, Elliot said, taking her hand in his. I'm all in. But just when it seemed like things were beginning to stabilize, a new complication emerged. One evening, as Elliot was leaving work, he spotted Tessa waiting near his car. His heart sank as she approached, her expression a mix of anger and desperation. We need to talk, she said, her voice tight. Tessa, this isn't a good idea, Elliot replied, glancing around nervously. I know you're trying to move on, she said, her tone sharp. But I deserve some closure, too. You can't just cut me out like I never existed. Elliot sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm sorry, Tessa, I really am. But I can't do this anymore. I've made my choice. And what about what I want? She demanded. You think you can just walk away and pretend nothing happened? That I don't matter? You do matter, Elliot said, his voice softening. But I can't keep hurting Lauren. I can't keep hurting myself. Tessa's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. Fine, she said, her voice trembling. If that's how it has to be, then I'll leave you alone, but don't expect me to forgive you for how this ended. As Tessa walked away, Elliot felt a wave of relief mixed with a deep sense of loss. He had made the right decision. He was sure of it, but that didn't make it any easier. For all her flaws, Tessa had been a part of his life, and letting her go felt like closing a door on a chapter he wasn't entirely ready to finish. When he got home that night, Lauren noticed the tension in his shoulders. Everything okay? She asked, her voice tentative. Yeah, Elliot said, forcing a smile. Just a long day. Lauren didn't press him, but as she turned back to the dishes, Elliot realized he couldn't keep this from her, not if they were going to rebuild their trust. I saw Tessa today, he said, his voice steady. Lauren froze, the plate in her hand hovering over the sink. What? She was waiting for me after work. She wanted to talk, he explained. I told her it was over, that I'm committed to you. Lauren set the plate down and turned to face him. And how did she take it? Not well, Elliot admitted, but it doesn't matter, she's out of my life now. Lauren studied him for a long moment before nodding. Thank you for telling me. The confrontation with Tessa marked a turning point for Elliot and Lauren. For the first time since the affair, it felt like they were truly on the same page, working together to move forward. But the scars of betrayal ran deep, and healing was a slow, painful process. Elliot threw himself into his role as a husband and father, making an effort to be more present and attentive. He started leaving work earlier, spending his evenings playing with Jacob or helping Lauren with dinner. Small gestures, but ones that spoke volumes about his commitment to their family. Lauren, too, began to let her guard down. She started smiling more, laughing at Elliot's jokes, and even reaching for his hand during their therapy sessions. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt and anger, but it was progress. As the weeks turned into months, the tension between them began to ease. They started going on date nights again, rediscovering the connection that had brought them together in the first place. And while the memory of the affair still lingered, it no longer defined their relationship. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Jacob play in the yard, Lauren turned to Elliot and said something that took his breath away. I think I'm starting to forgive you, she said, her voice soft but steady. Elliot's throat tightened. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. That means more than I can say. Lauren smiled, her hand finding his. Just don't give me a reason to regret it. I won't, Elliot promised. And for the first time in a long time, he truly believed it. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into life's most complicated moments. What do you think? Can Elliot and Lauren truly rebuild their marriage, or is the past too much to overcome? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The peace Elliot and Lauren were beginning to build felt fragile, like a house of cards standing against the wind. Each day brought moments of hope, but also reminders of just how precarious their progress was. They were healing, yes, but scars don't fade overnight. Things seemed to be looking up until an unexpected visitor shattered their newfound calm. It was a quiet Saturday morning when the knock came at the door. Lauren was in the kitchen making pancakes with Jacob, and Elliot was flipping through the mail. When he opened the door, his stomach sank. Tessa stood on the porch, her arms crossed, her expression stormy. "Elliot," she said, her voice clipped. "We need to talk." "This isn't a good time," Elliot replied, glancing over his shoulder. He could hear Lauren laughing with Jacob, completely unaware of the storm brewing outside. "It's never a good time, is it?" Tessa shot back, stepping closer. "But I'm not leaving until we've sorted this out." Elliot stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind him. "What do you want, Tessa?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "I've been trying to move on, Elliot," she said, her voice shaking. "But you can't just end things the way you did and expect me to disappear. I deserve better than that." Elliot sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, and I'm sorry, but I've made my decision. I'm trying to fix my marriage." "And what about me?" Tessa demanded. "You think you can just walk away and pretend none of this ever happened?" "I'm not pretending," Elliot said, his voice firm. "But we can't keep doing this, Tessa. It's not fair to anyone." Tessa's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Elliot thought she might lash out, but then she shook her head, her expression hardening. "Fine," she said, "but don't think for a second that you're the only one who gets to control how this ends." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Elliot standing there, his heart pounding. The encounter rattled Elliot more than he wanted to admit. He knew Tessa's anger was justified, but the way she'd left, it felt like a warning. As he stepped back inside, Lauren looked up from the stove, her brow furrowing. "Who was that?" she asked. "Just a salesperson," Elliot lied, forcing a smile. "Nothing important." Lauren didn't look convinced, but she let it go. Elliot, however, couldn't shake the unease that had settled over him. That evening, Elliot's fears were confirmed. He was scrolling through his emails when a new message popped up, from Tessa. The subject line read, "You can't ignore me forever." His pulse quickened as he opened the email. Inside was a single sentence that sent a chill down his spine. "If you won't talk to me, maybe Lauren will." Elliot's mind raced. He knew Tessa was hurt, but he never imagined she'd go this far. If Lauren found out about the email, or worse, if Tessa followed through on her threat, it could destroy everything they'd worked so hard to rebuild. The next day, Elliot arranged to meet Tessa at a cafe on the outskirts of town. He needed to end this once and for all, to make her understand that there was no going back. When he arrived, Tessa was already there, nursing a cup of coffee and staring out the window. She looked up as he approached, her expression guarded. "You've got some nerve," she said as he sat down. "Tessa, I'm not here to argue," Elliot began. "I just want to talk." "Talk?" Tessa scoffed. "You mean lie to me some more, pretend like you care?" "I do care," Elliot said, his voice earnest. "But we can't keep doing this. It's not healthy, for either of us." "And what am I supposed to do, Elliot?" Tessa asked, her voice breaking. "You were the one who chased me, who made me believe we had something real, and now you want to just walk away?" "I'm sorry," Elliot said, his throat tightening. "I never meant to hurt you, but this has to stop. You deserve someone who can give you the life you want, and that's not me." For a moment Tessa said nothing, then she nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll leave you alone, but don't expect me to forget." Elliot left the cafe feeling a mix of relief and regret. He knew he'd done the right thing, but the weight of his choices still hung heavy on his shoulders. When he got home, Lauren was waiting for him. "You were gone a long time," she said, her tone cautious. "I had to take care of something for work," Elliot replied, avoiding her gaze. Lauren studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay." But as Elliot walked past her, he could feel her eyes on his back, and he knew the cracks in their marriage were still far from healed. Over the next few weeks, things began to settle. Tessa kept her word, disappearing from Elliot's life entirely, and while the memory of their affair lingered, it no longer felt like a shadow hanging over him. Elliot and Lauren continued to work on their marriage, attending therapy sessions and finding small ways to reconnect. There were setbacks, of course, moments of doubt and frustration, but they were moving forward. And yet, the events of the past year had left their mark, shaping their relationship in ways neither of them could have predicted. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Lauren turned to Elliot and said something that caught him off guard. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened," she said, "and while I'll never forget what you did, I think it's made us stronger." Elliot looked at her, surprised. "Stronger?" "Yes," Lauren said, her voice steady. "We've been through hell, but we're still here, and that has to mean something." Elliot nodded, his chest tightening with emotion. "It means everything," he said. Lauren smiled, her hand finding his. "Then let's keep fighting for it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Elliot realized that while the road ahead would never be easy, it was one worth traveling together. They were learning to rebuild, not just their marriage, but themselves. If this story has kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales. What do you think? Can Elliot and Lauren truly find lasting happiness, or are some wounds too deep to heal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As Elliot and Lauren navigated the rocky path of rebuilding their marriage, they began to settle into a tentative peace. But just as they started to believe they had weathered the worst of the storm, life had one more twist in store for them. It began innocently enough. An ordinary Wednesday morning, Elliot was at work, sitting through yet another tedious meeting, when his phone buzzed with a notification. At first, he ignored it, but the persistent buzzing soon caught his attention. When he glanced down, his stomach dropped. The notification was from an unknown number, and the attached message read, "You should know the whole truth. Check your email." Elliot's heart pounded as he opened the email. Inside was a video attachment, along with a single line of text: "Secrets don't stay buried forever." His hands trembled as he clicked on the video. It was grainy and poorly lit, but the content was unmistakable. A recording of one of his more intimate moments with Tessa. The timestamp in the corner confirmed his worst fear. It had been filmed without his knowledge. Elliot's mind raced. Who had sent this and why now? Just when he and Lauren were starting to rebuild their lives, the implications were terrifying. If this video got out, it would destroy not just his marriage, but his career and reputation as well. Elliot spent the rest of the day in a fog of panic and paranoia, barely able to focus on his work. As soon as he got home, he pulled Lauren aside. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tight. Lauren frowned, setting down the book she'd been reading. "What's wrong?" Elliot hesitated, his stomach twisting in knots. Something from my past has come back. I think it's Tessa." "What do you mean?" Lauren asked, her expression darkening. He handed her his phone, showing her the email and the video. Lauren's face turned pale as she watched, her hands clenching into fists. "This can't be happening," she whispered, her voice shaking. "We've worked so hard to move past this, and now she's trying to drag us back into it." "I'll handle it," Elliot said quickly. "I'll find out who sent this and make it stop." Lauren stared at him, her eyes brimming with anger and fear. "You'd better, because if this video gets out, Elliot, we're done." Elliot knew he couldn't take any chances. The next morning, he hired a private investigator to track down the source of the email. In the meantime, he deleted the video and blocked the sender, though he knew it was only a temporary solution. The days that followed were a nightmare. Every time his phone buzzed, Elliot's heart leapt into his throat. He avoided eye contact with his coworkers, convinced they could somehow sense the weight of his secret. At home, the tension between him and Lauren was palpable, their fragile truce hanging by a thread. Then, a breakthrough. The investigator called with news. The email had been sent from an internet cafe on the other side of town. Surveillance footage showed Tessa entering the cafe around the time the email was sent. Elliot felt a surge of anger. He thought he'd ended things with Tessa, but clearly, she wasn't ready to let go. That evening, he drove to her apartment, his mind racing with what he would say. When she opened the door, Tessa looked surprised, and more than a little wary. "Elliot," she said, "what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," he said, his tone cold. Tessa stepped aside, letting him in. The apartment was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of perfume. "What's this about?" she asked, crossing her arms. Elliot pulled out his phone, showing her the email and video. "What the hell is this, Tessa? Are you trying to ruin my life?" Tessa's eyes widened. "I didn't send that," she said, her voice defensive. "I don't even have that video." "Don't lie to me," Elliot snapped. "The investigator traced it back to you." Tessa shook her head, her expression earnest. "I swear, Elliot, it wasn't me. I wouldn't do this to you." Elliot hesitated, his anger faltering. Was she telling the truth? And if she didn't send the email, then who did? The mystery deepened over the next few days. Tessa stuck to her story, insisting she had nothing to do with the video. And while Elliot wanted to believe her, the seeds of doubt had already been planted. Meanwhile, Lauren grew increasingly distant. The stress of the situation was taking its toll, and Elliot could feel her slipping away. One evening, as they sat in silence at the dinner table, she finally spoke. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "Every time I think we're moving forward, something else comes up to remind me of what you did." Elliot reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Lauren, please, I'm doing everything I can to fix this." "Are you?" she shot back. "Because all I see is a man who keeps dragging his family through the mud." Her words cut deep, but Elliot knew she was right. If he didn't find a way to resolve this soon, he would lose everything. The turning point came one fateful night when Elliot received a call from the private investigator. "We've identified the real sender," the investigator said. "It's not Tessa." Elliot's heart raced. "Then who is it?" There was a pause before the investigator replied. "It's someone from your office, a man named Chris Parker." Chris. The name sent a jolt of recognition through Elliot. Chris was a junior associate who had been passed over for a promotion, one that Elliot had received instead. They'd never been close, but Elliot never suspected him of harboring any resentment. But now it all made sense. Chris must have found the video somehow and used it to get back at Elliot. The betrayal stung, but more than that, it gave Elliot a sense of clarity. He finally knew what he had to do. The next morning, Elliot confronted Chris in the office parking lot. "We need to talk," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Chris looked startled but didn't deny anything. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Cut the crap," Elliot snapped. "I know you sent the video, and if you don't stop, I'll go to HR and the police." Chris's facade crumbled, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine," he muttered. "I was just trying to make a point. You think you're so perfect, but you're not." Elliot's anger flared. "You had no right to do this," he said. "Whatever issues you have with me, leave my family out of it." Chris nodded, his expression sullen. "It's over," he said. "You won't hear from me again." True to his word, Chris disappeared from Elliot's life, and the email stopped. But the damage had already been done. While the immediate threat was gone, the scars it left behind remained. Elliot and Lauren continued their therapy, but their sessions were fraught with tension. Every step forward felt like a battle, and there were days when Elliot wondered if their marriage would ever fully recover. But amid the pain, there were moments of hope. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching Jacob play, Lauren turned to Elliot and said something he hadn't expected. "I'm proud of you," she said softly, "for standing up for us, for fighting for our family." Elliot felt a lump form in his throat. "Thank you," he said. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life earning it." Lauren smiled, her hand finding his. "That's all I need to hear." Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories. What do you think? Can Elliot and Lauren's marriage survive, or is the damage too great? Share your thoughts in the comments below. With Chris out of the picture and the emails stopped, Elliot thought the worst was behind him. But as anyone who's lived through a storm knows, the hardest part isn't always the rain, it's what comes after. The quiet that follows can be just as deafening, forcing you to confront the wreckage left behind. For Elliot and Lauren, that wreckage was vast. Though they were no longer under immediate threat, the cracks in their marriage were deeper than ever. And as they worked to repair what had been broken, they couldn't escape the sense that another storm was brewing on the horizon. One evening, as they sat in yet another therapy session, their counselor posed a question that hit like a thunderclap. What does forgiveness look like to you? Lauren shifted uncomfortably, her gaze fixed on the floor. I don't know, she admitted. I thought it would mean letting go of the anger, but it's not that simple. Elliot reached for her hand, but she pulled away, a reflex she hadn't yet unlearned. I get it, he said softly. I don't know what forgiveness looks like either, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to find out. Their counselor nodded, her expression empathetic. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing to move forward, even when it's hard. The question is, are you both ready for that? The room fell silent as the weight of the question settled over them. And for the first time, Elliot wasn't sure of the answer. In the weeks that followed, the tension between them ebbed and flowed like the tide. Some days were good, filled with laughter and moments that felt almost normal. Other days were harder, weighed down by the unspoken resentment that lingered between them. But the real turning point came one rainy Friday night. Lauren had taken Jacob to a sleepover at a friend's house, leaving Elliot alone in the house for the first time in months. As the rain pattered against the windows, he found himself scrolling through old photos on his phone, pictures of happier times, back when their family felt whole. One photo, in particular, caught his attention. A candid shot of Lauren laughing, her head thrown back, her eyes sparkling. It was taken during a weekend trip to the mountains, a memory that now felt like it belonged to another lifetime. Elliot stared at the photo, a lump forming in his throat. He realized, with a clarity that felt almost painful, that he didn't just miss the woman in the photo, he missed the man he'd been when it was taken, the man who made her laugh like that. The next morning, Elliot woke with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in months. He spent the day cleaning the house, cooking Lauren's favorite dinner, and even picking up a bouquet of her favorite flowers. When Lauren and Jacob returned that evening, they were greeted by the scent of freshly baked lasagna and the sight of Elliot standing in the kitchen, an apron tied around his waist. What's all this? Lauren asked, her brow furrowing in suspicion. I just wanted to do something nice for you, Elliot said, his tone earnest. No strings attached, just a thank you for everything. Lauren hesitated, her eyes scanning his face as if searching for an ulterior motive. But when she saw the sincerity in his expression, her shoulders relaxed. Thank you, she said quietly, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled. That night, as they sat together on the couch, Elliot turned to Lauren and said something that had been weighing on his heart for months. I know I've said this before, but I need you to know how sorry I am for everything, and not just for what I did, but for how it made you feel. You didn't deserve any of it. Lauren looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I know you're sorry, Elliot, and I believe you, but forgiveness, it's going to take time. I'm not asking for it right now, he said. I just want you to know that I'll be here however long it takes. Lauren nodded, her lips trembling. Okay. The next few weeks brought more changes. Slowly but surely, Lauren began to let her guard down, allowing herself to trust Elliot again, if only in small ways. They started going on date nights, rediscovering the little things they loved about each other, and while the wounds of the past hadn't fully healed, they were starting to scar over. But just as they began to feel a sense of stability, an unexpected event threatened to upend everything. It happened on a crisp autumn morning. Elliot was getting ready for work when he noticed an envelope on the doorstep. There was no return address, just his name scrawled across the front in bold black letters. Inside was a single photograph, grainy and slightly blurred but unmistakable. It showed Elliot and Tessa in the parking lot of the cafe where they'd had their final conversation. The angle suggested it had been taken from a distance, by someone who'd been watching them. On the back of the photo, a chilling message was written, "We're not finished." Elliot's blood ran cold. Whoever had sent the video wasn't done with him yet, and this time the stakes were higher than ever. If you've been glued to this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more twists and turns. What do you think? Who's behind the photo? And what will Elliot do next? Share your theories in the comments below. The photograph was a stark reminder that the ghosts of Elliot's choices still lingered, threatening the fragile progress he and Lauren had made, as he stared at the chilling message scrawled on the back, "We're not finished." A familiar dread clawed its way into his chest. Whoever had sent this wasn't just trying to torment him. They wanted control, and Elliot knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. He showed the photograph to Lauren that evening. Her face paled as she read the message, and for a moment, it felt like all the walls they'd painstakingly rebuilt were crumbling again. "What does this mean, Elliot?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It means someone's trying to keep us trapped in the past," Elliot said. "But I'm not going to let them." Lauren studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "This isn't just about you anymore," she said finally. "It's about our family, so whatever you need to do to end this, do it." Elliot nodded, her words igniting a determination he hadn't felt in months. "I will," he promised. "And this time, I'll make sure it's over." The next morning, Elliot met with the private investigator once more, handing over the photograph and recounting everything that had happened since the video surfaced. Together, they began piecing together the clues, retracing the steps of whoever had been stalking Elliot and Tessa. It wasn't long before they discovered a lead, a car that had been spotted near the cafe during Elliot's meeting with Tessa. The license plate, traced through traffic cameras, led them to a name Elliot hadn't expected: Chris Parker. Chris again. The realization hit Elliot like a freight train. He'd confronted Chris weeks ago, and the man had promised to leave him alone. But now it was clear that Chris wasn't done, not by a long shot. Elliot debated what to do. Confronting Chris hadn't worked the first time, and going to HR or the police felt like an escalation that could backfire. But he couldn't let Chris keep holding this over his head. Instead, Elliot decided to take a different approach: transparency. He would take the power away from Chris by owning up to his mistakes, not just to Lauren, but to the people who mattered most. That evening, over dinner, Elliot sat down with Lauren and Jacob. It was a simple moment, a quiet meal at home, but it felt monumental. As they laughed over Jacob's stories from school, Elliot realized how much he stood to lose if he didn't take action. After Jacob went to bed, Elliot turned to Lauren. "There's something I need to do," he said, his voice steady, "and I need your support." Lauren's brow furrowed, but she nodded. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." The next day, Elliot went to his boss and laid everything on the table. He explained the situation with Chris, the threats, and the mistakes he'd made that had led to this point. His boss, though shocked, appreciated Elliot's honesty and assured him that the company would handle Chris appropriately. With the threat neutralized, Elliot and Lauren could finally breathe again. But the process of coming clean, to his boss, to Lauren, and to himself, had done more than just resolve the immediate crisis. It had given Elliot a new sense of clarity. He realized that the lies and secrecy that had defined the past year weren't just symptoms of his affair. They were symptoms of a deeper issue Elliot had been running from himself, from his own insecurities and fears, and until he confronted those head-on, he would never truly be free. Elliot and Lauren continued their therapy, but this time their focus shifted. They weren't just working on their marriage, they were working on themselves. For Elliot, that meant confronting the patterns of behavior that had led him to betray Lauren in the first place. For Lauren, it meant rediscovering her own strength and learning to set boundaries. It wasn't easy. There were still arguments, still moments of doubt, but there were also breakthroughs, moments of vulnerability and connection that reminded them why they had chosen to fight for their marriage in the first place. Months later, on a sunny spring afternoon, Elliot and Lauren stood hand in hand at Jacob's soccer game. The field buzzed with the sounds of cheering parents and kids laughing, and for the first time in a long time, Elliot felt a sense of peace. "I'm proud of us," Lauren said, her voice soft. Elliot turned to her, surprised. "Really?" Lauren smiled, her eyes meeting his. "Yeah, we've been through hell, but we came out stronger. I didn't think it was possible. But here we are." Elliot squeezed her hand, his chest swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me another chance." Lauren's smile widened. "Don't waste it." As the game ended and Jacob ran toward them, his face flushed with excitement, Elliot felt a surge of hope for the future. The road ahead wouldn't be perfect. Life never is. But for the first time in a long time, He believed they could handle whatever came next. And that was enough. If you've enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this one. What do you think about Elliot and Lauren's journey? Could you forgive in their shoes, or is betrayal too much to overcome? Let us know in the comments below.